Everyone loves a mystery, or more specifically, a mysterious character. Whether it's the silent loner with the hidden past or the masked warrior who never speaks, these types always draw us in. And that's probably what most people think was Hasbro's thinking behind the creation of Snake Eyes, a ninja commando cloaked in black, shrouded in silence and secrets. But the truth? Hasbro wasn't really chasing mystique. They were chasing savings. That's right, Snake Eyes didn't start off as a legend. He started out as a budget cut. In 1982, the 3.75-inch or 1/18th scale action figure world was firmly under the control of toys from a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars figures were kings of the toy aisles for years with their ships, playsets, and endless waves of characters. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, came a new challenger in the form of a team of real American heroes, ready to snatch the crown from the stars. That being said, at face value, the original batch of G.I. Joes didn't visually set themselves apart from other toy lines. Being military themed, the majority of the figures didn't stray far from the traditional Green Army man look. I mean, yes, there was the token female character and the token black guy, and by that I'm not referring to an African American, although there was that too. I'm talking about the Commando dressed in black, codenamed Snake Eyes. Now, Snake Eyes was definitely different from the rest. Aside from the aforementioned all-black uniform, he had no visible face and no insignia to clue you in on what his real deal was. As far as I was concerned, this made him seem more like a villain than a hero. After all, the most iconic black-clad masked figure I knew back then was Darth Vader. So it wasn't too much of a stretch to assume Snake Eyes to be the enemy. And to be fair, Hasbro probably leaned into that mystery on purpose. After all, what better way to spark interest in a new toy line than with a silent, shadowy figure that kids couldn't quite figure out? But behind the cool mystique was a far less glamorous reason: budget. Since G.I. Joe was a brand new line with no mega movie franchise to back it up, Hasbro was understandably quite conservative when it came to the Joe's initial rollout. Aside from creating a bunch of characters by mixing and reusing limited sculpted parts, they wanted the full wave of toys, figures, and vehicles on store shelves to come in under $100. And Snake Eyes was a strategic money saver. By creating a figure with no paint apps, no face sculpting, and a simple all-black mold, Hasbro was able to sneak in an extra character into the lineup without breaking the bank, giving the line a boost in both character count and kid appeal, all while keeping costs low. And as luck would have it, fate would smile down on this cheapo move on Hasbro's part. As anyone familiar with G.I. Joe knows, this money saver eventually turned out to be quite the cash cow for the toy company, as Snake Eyes would go on to be the breakaway character of the franchise. I mean, what other Joe could literally take over the title of their long-running comic and get their very own origin movie years later? But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Given how much we've got to cover, let's get a little bit more organized, shall we? It all starts with the toy, as I mentioned, released as part of the first wave of G.I. Joe in 1982. And with the toys came the only other source of relevant information about them, their file cards, which would help us kiddies get to know these real American heroes better. We got to know their real names, where they were born, their specialties and skills, and some flavored text to give each character a little bit more of a personality. Of course, in Snake Eyes' case, well, most of what we got was classified. So, no name, no birthplace, although we did get to know that Snake Eyes was proficient in 12 different unarmed fighting systems and is highly skilled with the use of edged weapons. Details that will probably make more sense later on with this mysterious guy. I mean, not to jump the gun again, but for those in the know, it's practically half the battle knowing what Snake Eyes, the character, would eventually evolve into. But for all intents and purposes, at the start, Snake Eyes was originally conceived as a commando, which in this case is defined as a military unit trained for shock tactics and quick raids, often operating in small teams behind enemy lines, and not for going around with no underwear. Sorry, and all the classified portions of his bio were in reference to all the Black Ops top secret missions he was a part of prior to joining G.I. Joe. Anyway, while technically the next major appearance of Snake Eyes would be in the pages of the G.I. Joe comics by Marvel, I figure a better place to begin this story would be with his more modest debut in the cartoons, where Snake Eyes started out fairly strong in the first miniseries, The Mass Device. It's here that it's firmly established that Snake Eyes doesn't talk, just to add a little more to his mystery and of course, save up a few more bucks in the voice acting budget. But despite his silence, Snake Eyes does play a major part in the series, as in during a mission in the Arctic to retrieve some radioactive crystals, he heroically sacrifices himself to allow his teammates to escape a cobra trap, subjecting himself to radiation sickness, befriends a wolf, battles a polar bear, gets rescued by a mysterious blind old man who nurses him back to health, allowing him to return to Joe Base with said crystals. So, good job, Snake Eyes. In the second miniseries, The Revenge of Cobra, Snake Eyes, sporting a new look, more on that later, is captured alongside Duke at the start of the series and spends the rest of the time participating in gladiatorial games for Cobra Commander and Destro's entertainment. In the end, he along with Duke, now joined by Roadblock and his friend Honolulu West, play a major role in defeating Cobra from within, disabling their main weapon, the Weather Dominator, with a bunch of creeper vines. Unfortunately though, after that it was pretty much downhill. In the third miniseries, The Pyramid of Darkness, while he still played a fairly significant role of going undercover with Shipwreck into a Cobra base, he was now resorting to break dancing and cross-dressing to avoid capture. So yeah, not the most flattering portrayal of our mysterious masked commando. Fortunately though, while it was a case of diminishing returns for Snake Eyes in the cartoon, it was quite the opposite trajectory in the pages of the Marvel Comics, where Snake Eyes really blossomed as a character. And the reasoning was pretty simple, as writer Larry Hama instantly pegged Snake Eyes as a favorite because of the creative storytelling challenge and freedom that came with a silent, faceless character. Since Snake Eyes didn't speak and never showed facial expressions, Hama had to rely entirely on body language, pacing, panel composition, and the reactions of other characters to convey his presence, emotions, and motivations. This pushed him to be more inventive and visual in his storytelling. Additionally, Hama loved the fact that Snake Eyes was a blank slate, a character who didn't come with any backstory, allowing him to slowly craft and reveal layers of complexity over time. And all this really kicked into high gear with the introduction of another iconic character into G.I. Joe in 1984, the ninja Storm Shadow. Now, aside from being the first real ninja introduced to any Western toy line, Storm Shadow was also significant for being the first Asian character brought into G.I. Joe. And him being a bad guy didn't really sit well with Hama, who was himself a third-generation Japanese American. And so, without Hasbro knowing, Hama set into motion the rehabilitation of Storm Shadow's character in the comics from a Cobra agent into a good guy. And Snake Eyes' own story would play a huge part in that as well. So, in issue 21, which served as the introduction of Storm Shadow in the comics, Hama revealed that both Ninja and Commando shared a matching hexagonal tattoo on their arms, strongly hinting at a shared past. And that past was then fleshed out further just a few issues later in the two-parter Origin of Snake Eyes. So, as the story goes, both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow fought for the US in the Vietnam War as part of a long-range recon patrol unit together with another OG Joe, the Ranger, Stalker. Anyway, it was here that Storm Shadow, then simply known as Tommy, the Asian kid with an unpronounceable last name, and Snake Eyes, then known as, well, Snake Eyes, formed a close friendship, a brotherhood forged on mutual love of family, with Tommy oftentimes talking about his uncle's family business back in Japan that he someday hoped to return to, and Snake Eyes sharing about his close bond with his twin sister back home. Tommy would even end up saving Snake Eyes' life by disobeying a direct order during an extraction and risking his life to recover Snake Eyes, who had earlier been taken down by bullet fire and thought dead. After the war, Snake Eyes would return to the US, where he would immediately find out that his parents and beloved twin sister were tragically killed in a car accident involving a drunk driver who turned out to be... we'll get back to that later. Anyway, having no place to go, Snake Eyes takes up Tommy's offer to join him in Japan to be a part of the family business that turns out to be an ancient ninja clan where he is accepted and trained by Tommy's uncles, the hard and soft masters, and excels. So much so that Snake Eyes has hinted at being the Hard Master's chosen successor to eventually lead the Arashikage clan. Anyway, this chapter in Snake Eyes' life is abruptly cut short when the Hard Master is killed by an assassin who is believed to be a jealous Tommy who conveniently disappears after his uncle's death. In truth, the innocent Tommy goes off to find his uncle's real killer, who actually ended up to be the mercenary Zartan, hired by the saboteur Firefly, who was in turn hired by Cobra Commander to kill Snake Eyes, whom the Commander blamed for his brother's death, who ironically was the drunk driver that killed Snake Eyes' family. Unfortunately, Zartan mistook the Hard Master as Snake Eyes because he was teaching him a secret ninja skill of impersonating Snake Eyes' heartbeat. So, the moral of the story, kiddos? Don't drink and drive or copy anybody's heartbeat. Anyway, after Japan, a now ninja-fied Snake Eyes returns to the US, living in solitude in the high Sierras until he is recruited by Hawk and Stalker to join the original G.I. Joe team. And it's here that Snake Eyes meets the counterintelligence specialist and future girlfriend of G.I. Joe First Sergeant Duke. Just kidding. Or am I? Team Scarduke. Scarlet, with whom Snake Eyes quickly forms a close bond with, because she reminded him of his sister. No, seriously. But anyway, they get close. Really close. And it's this closeness that unfortunately leads to Snake Eyes' face getting brutally disfigured and his vocal cords destroyed. During an early mission, Scarlet is trapped in a crashing helicopter and Snake Eyes refuses to leave her, which leads to his face getting blasted by a plume of burning vapor caused by ignited aviation fuel. And while both of them survive the crash, Snake Eyes is forever changed physically, leading to his iconic masked look and silent ways. And speaking of his face, while never explicitly shown, Snake Eyes is hinted at being horribly disfigured, like Mighty Man and Yuck levels of awfulness. Are you familiar with that cartoon? About that tiny superhero and his ugly ass dog? I mean, he was so ugly that people literally freaked out when they saw his face. Man, 80s cartoons were the best. Anyway, Snake Eyes' face. It remains this way up until the 93rd issue of the comics, when Snake Eyes finally decides to do something about it. Accompanied by Scarlet, Snake Eyes travels to the Bern Institute of Reconstructive Surgery in Switzerland to have his face fixed by a certain Dr. Huntkinder. And this issue is pretty monumental because it's the first time that Snake Eyes' damaged face is fully shown. And you know what? It's not that bad. I mean, based on how everyone in the past reacted, I was thinking Two-Face or Gus Fring levels of craziness. Anyway, Dr. Huntkinder, or is that Kinder, whatever, agrees to do the surgery. But when he sees a picture of a pre-injured Snake Eyes, he is reminded of another former patient of his that he treated years prior after she was severely burned in a fiery his tank explosion. The Baroness, who apparently also has a past with Snake Eyes as well. Surprise, surprise. A longer time ago, a much younger and innocent Baroness accompanied her older brother, the Baron de Cobray, on a medical relief mission in Vietnam. Unfortunately, he is killed by a couple of North Vietnamese operatives posing as his contacts, and Snake Eyes arrives to take down said operatives, but it's too late to save her brother. And all the young Baroness sees is her dead brother, the dead baddies, and an American soldier standing over them. So naturally, she assumes Snake Eyes is at fault. Man, what is it with Snake Eyes being falsely blamed for the deaths of everyone's brothers? Anyway, so back to present day, being apparently a fan of the Baroness, the doctor tips her off on his latest patient, and so she heads off to Bern to capture Snake Eyes, which she does, but not before shooting Scarlet point blank in the face. Like, seriously, I thought Hama actually killed off Scarlet, but don't worry. Apparently, as explained, the bullet hit her skull at an oblique angle and was deflected, so she survives. But apparently, we've got Snake Eyes' girlfriend in a coma. I know, it's serious. So Snake Eyes is captured and whisked back to Cobra's base, where the Baroness has him chained up to a wall with the intention of torturing him slowly, with the help of a trio of kooky-looking dudes called the Payne Brothers. Let's make an assessment of this little setup. A nearly naked, facially reconstructed Snake Eyes, a pot of fiery coals, one dude in a full black suit, another with a full-on mask with goggles, and another with a huge pair of knives strapped to his chest in an X pattern. I wonder where I've seen that before. Yeah, I guess we know where all this is gonna lead to. As expected, Snake Eyes escapes, but not before getting his newly repaired face burned away. So yeah, back to square one. But hey, at least Snake Eyes got a brand new look out of this, and Destro, of all people, clears his name. And well, Scarlet eventually wakes up from her coma, so yay. And now that everyone is happy, how about we take a quick breather and allow me to ask all of you about your thoughts on Snake Eyes? I mean, do I really need to ask if all of you are fans? Let me know how you prefer Snake Eyes, with or without underwear. Just kidding. Commando or Ninja? Or share your favorite Snake Eyes stories or memories in the comments below and tell me your story. And also please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. So, as expected, Snake Eyes continues to be quite the popular dude in the comics. So popular that for a time, the G.I. Joe comic is rebranded into G.I. Joe starring Snake Eyes, wherein he is given his own specialized ninja force to lead into battle. Okay, if you want to be technical about it, Storm Shadow is the official leader of Ninja Force, but whatever. And in any case, Snake Eyes stars in the comic all the way up to its last issue, number 155, where Snake Eyes actually takes center stage in a very fresh and unique way. See, this rather non-action-packed final issue is structured around a letter written by Snake Eyes to a young boy named Sean Collins, who has patriotic and honor-filled dreams of joining the military. Now, Sean isn't just some rando that Snake Eyes decides to write to, as he is the adopted son of one of Snake Eyes' old war buddies, Wade Collins, from Vietnam. In fact, a member of the same long-range recon patrol unit with Storm Shadow and Stalker. Long thought dead, turned Crimson Guard and later G.I. Joe ally. Another story for another time. Anyway, the letter serves as a thoughtful message from a battle-hardened soldier to a boy struggling with his identity, talking not only about the destructiveness of war, but of the horrors it inflicts on those involved in it. In a way, it's like a retrospective of all the personal pain Snake Eyes has had to endure, and yet, despite it all, he doesn't regret his choice of being a soldier because, in his words, he also experienced the best of what humanity had to offer. Selfless bravery, compassion, honor, and dignity in the face of sure death. It's a very somber yet hopeful message that serves as a quiet goodbye to the long-running series. But more than that, it finally gives us a rare and intimate look at Snake Eyes' internal voice. Hearing Snake Eyes' written voice is quite powerful if you ask me, and was a brilliant way for Larry Hama to give fans a proper and emotional farewell to the Marvel series. But of course, we all know that G.I. Joe didn't end with the team being decommissioned in the Marvel Comics, as a few years later, a new publisher, Devil's Due, took over the license and set off to continue where Marvel had left off, and had the team recommissioned. But before the actual team's return, Snake Eyes' story is continued in the miniseries Master and Apprentice, where we find Snake Eyes, now engaged to Scarlet, taking on a new ninja apprentice named Ophelia, who weirdly kinda looks like Scarlet. But anyway, Snake Eyes and Ophelia are recruited by Duke to accompany his newly assembled Special Ops Hammer team to take down a resurfaced Firefly. Anyway, long story short, the mission is a disaster. Firefly escapes, but not before killing Ophelia and the entire Hammer team, save for one member, Sean Collins. Yup, that's right, the young man that Snake Eyes wrote a letter to at the end of the Marvel run. Anyway, so as far as the whole Master and Apprentice goes, it turns out that the red-haired Ophelia was kind of a red herring, as Snake Eyes' true apprentice turns out to be Sean Collins, who joins Snake Eyes in the High Sierra's retreat and eventually becomes a G.I. Joe ninja, Kamakura. Anyway, once the license was taken over by IDW years later, Larry Hama was brought back to continue his story from the Marvel run, so unfortunately, all Devil's Due stuff was made non-canon. That being said, Sean Collins is also brought back in Hama's version, but this time doesn't become Kamakura, but is still recruited by the Joes and given the codename Throwdown. Despite not being Kamakura in this iteration, it is revealed later on that Sean is ninja trained, as he also sports the same hexagonal tattoo that Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow have. Anyway, so why all this talk about Sean Collins? Well, see, in Hama's continuation, he actually does the unthinkable and kills off Snake Eyes as he sacrifices himself in order to defeat a resurrected Serpentor. He basically tackles the Cobra Emperor down into a pit with a live grenade, ending them both. It's a pretty fantastical story that involves a giant robot that blasts off into the atmosphere with Throwdown inside its head trying to disable it. Anyway, upon re-entry, Sean is severely injured. Well, his head is burned big time and his vocal cords are destroyed. He survives though, and I'm pretty sure you know where this is headed, right? With the OG Snake Eyes dead, the Joes figure the best way to carry on his legacy, and more importantly keep up appearances with Cobra that he never died, is by creating a new Snake Eyes. And look who conveniently turns up with a newly burned face and messed up vocal cords. Sean Collins, aka Throwdown, and now Snake Eyes version 2.0. But the craziness doesn't end there, as a few issues later, another new character is randomly introduced into the series. A young, highly athletic and skilled lady named Mary Sue, no I kid, Dawn Moreno, who is recruited by Cobra and subjected to the brainwave scanner to ensure her utmost loyalty. But due to some hijinks, the OG Snake Eyes memories and skills, which apparently were stored in the scanner, are accidentally downloaded into Dawn's brain. She escapes and eventually becomes a female Snake Eyes. Man, okay, I'll admit, I'm not closely following this turn of events, and who knows, maybe Dawn Moreno is actually a cool character and all, but from an outsider's perspective looking in, I don't know, it's just too hokey for me. Eventually though, the OG Snake Eyes does return with a twist, in a newly cloned pre-helicopter accident disfigured body, which means now Snake Eyes can talk. Yeah. Okay, jury is still out on this one, and maybe it's just a temporary thing, but if you ask me, call me a hater, but it just ain't Snake Eyes if he can talk. But as controversial as this sounds, I mean, this is still Hama writing, and if anyone has the right to change Snake Eyes in such a radical way, it's him. So more power to this new chatty Snake Eyes. Besides, in my opinion, it isn't the worst treatment given to Snake Eyes by a long shot. That would go to the live-action version of Snake Eyes we saw in the G.I. Joe Origins movie released in 2021. But before we get to that travesty, I just want to touch upon Snake Eyes from the previous two movies, The Rise of Cobra in 2009 and Retaliation in 2013. For all their faults, I'll at least give them credit for doing a pretty faithful and decent version of Snake Eyes. Well, if you could get past the lips. Played by British actor, martial artist, and stuntman Ray Park, who is understandably best known for his physical acting over anything else with his iconic portrayals of Darth Maul and Toad. So anyway, pretty much perfect casting for the silent ninja master, Snake Eyes. Anyway, while decent in my opinion, the two movies didn't do quite as well as the producers had hoped, and so for their third live-action G.I. Joe attempt, they decided to do a sort of soft reboot and start from ground zero with an origin story for arguably their most popular character, Roadblock. Just kidding, Snake Eyes. And boy, did they really sink the flag on that one. Right out of the gate, they swung for the fences and went crazy with casting crazy rich Asian actor Henry Golding as Snake Eyes. And look, with all due respect to the actor, martial arts expert is far from the first thing that comes to mind with this guy. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that he was cast primarily for his face, which doesn't make sense given that a major part of Snake Eyes' character is that he has no face. I mean, yes, I get it, it's an origin story, but what were they planning to do? F up and hide that pretty boy face for future installments? Because that would be the only way to stay true to the character. You know, in my opinion, it didn't even matter if Henry Golding was half Asian and looked Asian. as opposed to the Caucasian that Snake Eyes was traditionally depicted in the comic. I get that this was released in a time where cultural diversity and race swapping was rampant, and ultimately, I could get behind an Americanized Asian Snake Eyes reconnecting with his Asian ninja heritage. But what I can't accept is completely removing the mystery from the character and telling his story in such a lazy and contrived way, like explaining that his name comes from his father's killer's fondness of using a pair of dice as a means of gambling with his victims' lives. It doesn't make sense and, well, doesn't need to be told. Like, we didn't need to know that Han Solo was given his name because he told a random Imperial immigration officer that he was traveling alone. Ugh. Look, I mean, Hama did give Snake Eyes his origin in the comics, but even then he kept the character ambiguous, going as far as to never fully showing his face. You can tell a story, embellish it just a little bit, as long as you ultimately stay the course and respect the real spirit and history of the character. It also didn't help that this version of Snake Eyes was kind of a prick. I mean, seriously, he worked with a Yakuza boss to betray Storm Shadow, who welcomes him into the Arashikage clan in gratitude for saving his life. He steals the sacred Arashikage relic called the Jewel of the Sun that empowers the Yakuza boss and allows him to lay waste to the Arashikage temple. Storm Shadow has no choice but to use said gem to save his clan from the shit show that Snake Eyes brought upon them, and gets banished for it because apparently it's a big no-no for them to use the gem. And while Snake Eyes, he gets off scot-free because he had a last-minute change of heart and helped the good guys in the climactic battle and gets recruited into G.I. Joe. I mean, the least they could have done was have him get grossly disfigured and lose his voice in the end, but nope. He ends the movie with pretty face intact, as chatty as ever, and now wearing his trademark Snake Eyes helmet with flip-down visor because it looks cool. Anyway, it's no surprise that that movie pretty much bombed and killed the live-action franchise for the time being. And well, I guess while we wait for their fourth attempt, apparently this time with the Transformers, we can talk about some good old Snake Eyes action figures. As far as vintage Snake Eyes figures go, we got 5. The first one, released in 1982, was the original Commando Snake Eyes, the money saver, the one cast in basic black plastic with zero paint deco, and for me, my favorite version of Snake Eyes. Once Storm Shadow was introduced in 1984 and prompted the evolution of Snake Eyes from Commando to Ninja, we got the second version and arguably his most iconic look, trading his goggles in for his trademark knightly visor in 1985. Aside from the additional paint deco hits of gray and his badass looking sword because, you know, ninja, I was mostly excited over the inclusion of his furry buddy from the cartoons, the wolf, Timber. Version 3 came out in 1989 and it was fine, kind of like a more cohesive blend of the first two versions. This was basically the uniform he stitched together after stripping the Payne brothers of their duds. The Neon 90s gave us Snake Eyes version 4, which while not neon itself was pretty colorful as far as Snake Eyes figures go, throwing in rich blue elements as well as a rather large pair of red goggles and silver faceplate. Not a fan, but I guess it has its charm. And finally, the Ninja Force Snake Eyes in 1993, which at this point was basically Hasbro checking boxes. Predominantly black, ninja weapons, a splash of blue and silver webbing, and real ninja action feature. Oh well, check, 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 check. And after that came a whole plethora of Snake Eyes figures. In the span of 17 years, we got about 60 plus versions of Snake Eyes, a majority of which coming from the 25th anniversary line, which revitalized G.I. Joe in 2007 and beyond. But instead of touching on every single one and basically going crazy, I thought I'd just give special mentions to my favorites of the bunch, starting with version 44, Paris Pursuit Snake Eyes, released in 2009. And what makes this version stand out? Well, 2 words: trench coat. I mean, how can you make a dark figure look even more mysterious and cool? Give him a trench coat. Plus, all the traditional Snake Eyes details are present: visor, sword, firearms, and black timber. Also, as an added bonus, despite being from the live-action movie The Rise of Cobra toy line, no lips. Next, we have version 48, also released in 2009, City Strike Snake Eyes from the awesome micro series G.I. Joe Resolute. I have to say, this has got to be my favorite modern iteration of Snake Eyes in action figure form, and a perfect plastic representation of the greatest animated portrayal of Snake Eyes ever. Like, seriously, it more than makes up for his crazy misuse in the original cartoon. I just love this excellent blend of both Commando and Ninja Snake Eyes in this version. And speaking of Commando versions of Snake Eyes, I give you Pursuit of Cobra's Ninja Commando, released in 2011. Now, don't let the ninja in his name or the ninja swords he comes with fool ya. This is the ultimate modern rendition of the original Commando Snake Eyes, released way back in 1982. But for the perfect modern update of the iconic 1985 Snake Eyes, I give you version 67 from the G.I. Joe Retaliation line. I mean, there's nothing else to say about this guy. If classic Ninja Snake Eyes is your jam, then this is the only 1/18th version you will need. And of course, we can't finish off without going over the latest versions of Snake Eyes released at a significantly larger scale. So in 2020, Hasbro literally broke the traditional 1/18th scale G.I. Joe universe by giving us the very first official 1/12th scale or 6-inch G.I. Joe classified line. And what better way to ninja kick things off with but a special Hasbro Pulse exclusive deluxe Snake Eyes, which came with a shit ton of accessories and weapons, which I didn't get. I just settled for the regular release of essentially the same figure, which I got because I just felt I was just checking a box. What I was more stoked about adding to my shelf though was the retro version, which was basically a straight up upsized version of the Commando Snake Eyes. They also gave us a more modernized Commando Snake Eyes that came packed with a nice timber figure. I ended up just getting his wolf pal loose from an online seller. We also got a desert themed Snake Eyes, cool but ultimately a pass for me, and an upcoming classified take on version 4 Snake Eyes, originally released in 1991. Also a pass for now. Sorry, not a big fan of the added bright colors. Anyway, finally, we also will be getting a Toon-inspired, slightly radioactive version of Snake Eyes, which will be coming with a polar bear. Yeah, I don't know, the bear is cool, but as far as Toon Snake Eyes go, that slot is filled in my collection by the Super 7 Ultimates version of Snake Eyes. Now, in the original miniseries, Snake Eyes had a pretty distinct look. While based on the original Commando toy, the Toon version replaced the action figure's black color with a darker blue and added purple and black details, and bare hands. So yeah, pretty unique. And if you're familiar with Super 7, you know what to expect. A really Toon-accurate looking figure with pretty basic, no, limited articulation, and a boatload of accessories, including his very own timber, to, you know, justify the pretty high price tag, in my opinion. But whatever, for all its faults, I like him, and for my G.I. Joe cartoon collection, he's perfectly fine. And speaking of fine, are you familiar with the dude named Seymour P. Fine? Better known as the G.I. Joe Laser Trooper Sci-Fi. If you haven't, I don't blame you, as I heard as far as Joes go, he's gotten pretty obsolete. But if you do want to know more about Sci-Fi and his fellow obsolete buddy Flash, I've got their story here. Or if you want other Joe stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.